Welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about how this agile movement started. It all started way back in the year 2001 when 17 engineers, right, who had experience of developing software in iterative and incremental way, they got together and they came up with something called as Agile Manifesto. The whole reason of building or coming up with this manifesto was they did a lot of experiments. They saw that the traditional ways of developing software doesn't suit very well when it comes to developing complex products like a software development, which is basically a complex in nature, right? So seeing that the traditional ways doesn't work, they came up with something called as Agile Manifesto. Let's understand what this Agile Manifesto is all about, right? So Agile Manifesto talks about 4 values and 12 principles. We need to understand before even we get to Agile Manifesto is the first line. It says that we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value. The first value it talks about is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. What exactly this means, right? We have to understand that for any given problem, right, the best way to solve a given problem is people getting together, understanding what exactly the problem statement is and what actions have to be taken in order to address a given particular problem. So Agile emphasizes more on individuals and interactions over process and using of processes and tools. The second value it talks about is about producing working software over comprehensive documentation. So we have seen that in traditional ways of developing software, usually what happens is you have a requirement stage which you complete at the beginning of the project and assume that 30% or 40% of the project is completed once the requirement phase has been completed. So what in Agile the emphasis is given is we cannot really conclude that by having finished the requirement phase or the design phase 60%, 30% of the project is completed. So the emphasis here is basically on the working software, because at the end of the day it's the working software which gives values to your customer. So unless that value is realized by the customer, there is no point in giving a comprehensive documentation and assuming that certain percentage of project has been completed at that particular stage. So the emphasis in Agile is more over delivering value to the customer by releasing the working software frequently to the customer. The third value that we are going to talk about is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Now, what does this mean? This means that Agile again emphasizes on customer being part of the development team, so that they also understand what it really means to build a particular software product, and at the same time having customer close to the development team, most of the questions pertaining to the requirements and any kind of decisions can be taken pretty early rather than having this communication delays. So there is a lot of emphasis on the customer feedback and customer being part of the development team. So we say that customer collaboration is more important over contract negotiations. The fourth value that we are going to talk about is responding to change over following a plan. What does this really means, right? So today you have seen that things are changing very rapidly, right? If something is of much more important today, tomorrow it might become a kind of a redundant when it comes to a software product or software applications. So the customer's competitive advantage in the market, the important is to respond to the change rather than sticking on to a particular plan, which at the end of the day you might have to rework on the plans based on the learnings and based on the realities that you would have experienced by executing a or working on a particular project. So Agile emphasizes more on ready to be responding to the changes over following a particular plan. So, apart from these four values, the Agile Manifesto also talks about the 12 principles. So, let us start with looking at the 12 principles which have been designed as part of the Agile Manifesto. The first principle talks about our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. What does this mean, right? This means that end users, whoever is the sponsor of the project, the customer, right, they are going to get value out of your project only when you release a valuable software to your customer. So, in Agile, we say that our highest priority is always to deliver high valuable software to our customer in early as well as continuous delivery of valuable software. So, it is not just about delivering early, it is all about again about delivering the continuous software to your customer. The second principle talks about welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. What does this mean, right? So, basically the requirements are something which keeps on changing, and we have seen this over and over again executing hundreds and thousands of projects, that having the customer fixed to a set of requirements is something which is not possible, right. So, changing requirements is something which is going to happen continuously, and not only that, the current market conditions also in such a way that it forces the customers to keep on changing the requirements periodically. So, to keep our customer get that competitive advantage in the market, we as a software development team should be ready to accept the changes and be ready to make those changes in our software for the customers. Let us move on to the next principle. The third principle basically talks about deliver working software frequently from couple of weeks to couple of months with preference to a shorter time scale. What does this mean, right? So, as we emphasized in the first principle, it is again delivering that valuable software frequently to your customer. So, frequently we have to ensure that in every quarter that we release, or every month that we release, or in every iteration if we make a release to our customers, that is when they will realize the value of delivering the software, and at the same time it is the customers who and the end users who are going to use our software. So, the feedback from the end customers is very critical when it comes to deciding what should be our future course of development. So, that is where we need to understand that we have to deliver the software very frequently into the production, right. The shorter time scale, the better. And today you definitely have most of the engineering practices which we can make use of to have this working software release, in fact iteration by iteration if it is really required. And to give you an example, right, Amazon actually deploys a working software in production every 1.5 seconds. So, there are engineering practices which we can make use of, which enables us to produce that working software and push something into the production as early as possible. So, the first three principles that we saw was inclined more towards the customer and customer being part of the entire software development cycle, right. So, let us move on to the next principle, which is about business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project, right. So, the customer has to be involved in the entire cycle of software development, so that they also understand and they take a better decisions when it comes to what features have to be developed at what given point of time, right. So, that is what we are looking at when it comes to agile ways of working. So, you want your customer or a customer support customers representative to be working closely with the IT team to really help them understand and at the same time it also helps the IT team grow their domain knowledge, and the customer will actually understand the ways of developing software, which is mutually exclusive and it's beneficial for both customers as well as IT people. So the first four principles that we have seen is mostly talking about how a customer has to be closely working with the development team in order to develop any given software product. So let's move on to the next principle. The fifth principle basically talks about build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Right. So what does this mean? Right. This talks about how a team has to function when it comes to a software development team, right? So basically it's the leadership team who has to, not only leadership team, from the customer's point of view also, we need to ensure that we are providing an environment where the IT team is enjoying developing any given software, and at the same time we have to trust them that they are going to do their best in order to produce a given outcome, right? So whatever may be the outcome that you are producing, give them the required motivation, give them the required environment which is required, where they can flourish and they enjoy the entire software development making process. So let's move on to the next principle, the sixth principle. This talks about the most effective and efficient method of conveying information to and within the development team is face-to-face conversation. And this is something which all of us understand implicitly, right? So face-to-face conversation is something which helps a lot when it comes to quicker decision making process, when it comes to conveying any kind of information, as we know that when we are communicating with someone, there is a lot of non-verbal communication that also happens, right? So we can quickly make decisions, you can quickly agree upon what action items have to be taken. So there is a emphasis more on face-to-face conversations rather than any other ways of communicating when it comes to communication in a agile project, right? The other beauty of face-to-face conversation is basically it will also help you to build relationships. So that will help a lot when it comes to building a high quality software which actually meets the customer needs, right? So building relationships among individuals will have a greater impact on whatever outcome that we are producing at the end of the day, right? So the agile emphasizes more on having these face-to-face conversation over any other form of communication. The seventh principle talks about working software is the primary measure of progress. When it comes to customers, it's only when they realize what value has been delivered through a working software, that's when they will realize whether what should be the future course of development and are we going in a right direction when it comes to building a software product. So, and at the same time, it's the end users whose feedback is very critical when it comes to deciding what should be your future course of action from the software development standpoint. So always it's important that we measure our software delivery, which will actually give you a understanding in terms of what ROI is actually being developed by demonstrating or releasing a working software with a shorter and frequent timely deliverables. So let's move on to the next principle, which is eighth principle. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely, right? So during the definition of agile itself, as I pointed out, sustainable development is something which is very much critical when it comes to predicting at what point of time what features can be given to the end users. And basically your customer needs that predictability, which is the reason we say the sponsors, developers and users should maintain a constant pace indefinitely, right? And this is where the role of Scrum Master or Agile coaches comes into picture, where basically the role is to coach people in terms of how they can maintain this constant pace indefinitely, right? So that's the essence of this particular principle. Now, if you see, the first principles was aligned towards what customer has to do when it comes to delivering software, and how close the customers have to get involved in the software development process, so that it makes a better way in terms of what is that we are delivering. So the principle 5, 6, 7 and 8 talks about how a team has to function. What are some of the characteristics of when it comes to a software development team working in an agile project? The next principle is basically the ninth principle, which talks about continuous attention to technical excellence, and good design enhances agility. So what does this mean, right? This principle really talks about some of the engineering practices, right, which helps you to build software, and building software as a craftsmanship rather than just working on some particular code, right? So this particular principle is mostly talking about the art of developing any given software. And today you are having many engineering practices, like for example TDD, BDD, continuous integration, continuous delivery. These are some of the practices which actually helps you in building a software which is of high quality in nature. Let's move on to the next principle, which is 10th principle. The 10th principle states that simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. What does this mean, right? At the beginning of this course, as I said, there is a statistics which says that 46% of the features which we built in the software is actually not being used in the real time, which means that there is a lot of effort, money being spent without even understanding that whether a particular feature is really required to be built or not. So this principle really talks about not just about the features, it also talks about, say if the software development team is working on 10 different tasks, right, you have to think whether all the tasks are really essential in order to build that particular piece of software or not, right? So you have to eliminate some of the ways that you keep on working on which doesn't result or add value when it comes to producing a given particular outcome. So this principle really talks about identifying such things, which we call it as waste, and then eliminating waste from the software development process and software product itself. The next principle, the 11th principle, basically talks about the best architectures, requirements and design emerge from self-organizing teams. Right, now what does this really mean, right? So let's talk about this keyword called as self-organizing team, right? So what does really a self-organizing team means? Right, a self-organizing team is basically a team. If you are having, say, 100 tasks to do, the team will get around these particular tasks. They know what is that they have to do, and they work as a team, decide which tasks to be picked up, and they work on executing, which actually results in producing the required software. Right, so self-organizing team, if I really have to give you an example, say from cricket context, you would have seen that as soon as the players enters the field, they take their positions where they have to stand during the course of the match, right? So it depends on their specialization. For example, you would have seen Virat Kohli standing at the boundary lines at the death overs, whereas he stands at the slip cordon when you start really at the start of the match, right? So the way that do is they know their strengths. Based on their strengths and what is needs to be done, they know as a team what they have to do in order to achieve a required outcome. So that's the whole idea of self-organizing team, right? So this particular principle talks about how a particular architecture, requirement and design emerges through the self-organizing team. The final principle, the 12th principle, which is basically the last principle, it talks about at regular intervals the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjust its behavior accordingly. It's about developing the continuous learning culture, which means that you have to look back what happened in a given iteration and come up with certain action items which will help the overall improvement of the team, not only in terms of process but in terms of people, process and product. So you have to consider all three aspects and think about what the team can do in order to improve as a team. So this particular principle really forces continuous improvement culture within the team. So here are the last four principles, the 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th. These four principles basically talks about how a software can be, this is mostly from continuous improvement point of view, right. So these four principle emphasizes more on developing that continuous improvement culture within the team. This brings us to the end of this particular video, which talked about the origins of Agile and how the Agile Manifesto came into existence. We also talked about the 4 values and 12 Agile principles, which is the entire crux of Agile. In the next video, we are going to look at some of the project management frameworks which have been designed based on the Agile values and principles.